Here is what the history books tell us. The great railway terminals of the 19th century were built to manage the explosive movement of people and goods across an industrializing world. Cities were swelling. Trade was accelerating. Steam had collapsed distance. And so, the logic goes, infrastructure expanded to meet the moment. Supply followed demand. Construction followed population. That is the conventional explanation, and for decades, it has felt sufficient. Until you measure the buildings. Grand Central Terminal in New York, completed in 1913, was designed to handle 100 million passengers per year at the time of its opening. The actual annual ridership in 1913 was approximately 43 million. That is not a minor discrepancy. That is a building engineered for more than double its immediate need, at the cost of hundreds of millions of dollars in today's value, at a moment when there was no reasonable projection that the demand would arrive within any near-term planning window. That alone might be dismissed as optimism, as the ambition of industrialists who believed in growth. But Grand Central is not alone. This video explores historical interpretations and unanswered questions found in existing records. It does not present definitive conclusions. St. Pancras Station in London opened in 1868. At the time, it was the largest single-span roof structure in the world, a barrel-vaulted iron arch stretching 245 feet across, covering an interior volume that engineering historians have described as extravagant for the era's actual rail traffic. The Midland Railway, which commissioned it, was not the dominant rail operator in Britain at the time. It was a regional line. And yet the structure it built was not regionally scaled. It was built as if anticipating a volume of movement and a prestige of function that the company, by any contemporary estimate, did not yet require. St. Pancras opened with fewer daily departures than the capacity of its platforms implied. The hotel attached to it, the Midland Grand, sat partially empty for stretches of its early operation. The infrastructure preceded the demand. And the question this raises is not whether such ambition existed. It clearly did, but whether ambition alone explains the precision of the engineering. Because ambition is imprecise by nature. What we see here is something more specific. Systems built to exact tolerances for loads and flows that were not yet present, in a pattern that repeats with striking regularity across unconnected regions. The Pennsylvania Railroad's Broad Street Station in Philadelphia, which operated from 1882 until 1952, was built to accommodate traffic volumes that the railroad would not reach for another 2 decades. Engineers at the time noted in their records that the station's foundational systems, its ventilation columns, its underground passageways, its load-bearing calculations, appeared calibrated for a density of use that bore little relation to the passenger counts of the 1880s. Those records still exist. They are publicly available in railway archives. And they describe, in professional engineering language, a gap between immediate function and realized capacity that the engineers themselves did not explain, only noted. Now consider what it takes to build at this scale. To construct Grand Central Terminal required approximately 7,500 workers over a decade. It required the coordination of multiple sub-industries: steel fabrication, stone quarrying, electrical systems installation, subterranean waterproofing in Manhattan's notoriously difficult underground geology. It required a project management apparatus that, by modern standards, would be considered impressive for the early 2000s, not the early 1900s. The question that arises is not one of capability. Clearly, these things were built. They stand. You can walk through them today. The question is one of decision-making logic. In the conventional framework of industrial economics, large infrastructure investments are preceded by demand signals. You see ridership. You project growth. You build to meet that projected growth, perhaps with modest overage for future expansion. This is how rational capital allocation works, and it is the framework every historian applies when explaining this period. But the overage in these cases is not modest. Washington, D.C. Union Station, opened in 1907, was at its opening the largest train station in the world. It covered approximately 200,000 square feet. It contained a waiting room modeled on the baths of Diocletian in Rome, a room with a ceiling height of 96 feet. It had a capacity for 50,000 daily visitors. In 1907, Washington, D.C., had a population of approximately 350,000 people. The station was not serving a metropolis. It was a capital city of modest size, and it received a structure that many contemporary observers described as bewildering in scale. By what demand calculation does a city of 350,000 require the largest train station in the world? Some historians have pointed to symbolic reasoning, that capitals are built for prestige, not function. That Washington was intended to grow, and its infrastructure was meant to announce that intention to the world. These are plausible explanations, and they are worth holding seriously. But symbolic reasoning does not explain the engineering precision underneath the symbolism. The structural foundations of Union Station, its underground utility corridors, its platform geometry, these were not oversized in the way that ornamental decisions are oversized. They were engineered to function, to bear specific loads, to channel specific flows. Decoration can be scaled to ambition. Engineering is scaled to use. And the use in 1907 was not there. This pattern of infrastructure scaled not to present demand, but to a demand that had not yet fully materialized, appears with enough regularity across this period that it begins to resist single-case explanations. Each individual structure can be explained. But when the explanation must be applied again and again and again across different countries, different rail operators, different political contexts, and different decades, the explanation begins to strain, not break, strain. And in that strain is something worth examining more carefully. The pattern does not stay contained to railway terminals. Expand the frame slightly, move from stations to the systems connecting them, and the same structural logic appears. Rail lines laid through territories where population density did not yet justify the investment. Tunnels bored through mountain ranges for routes that carried, in their opening years, a fraction of the traffic their engineering implied. Bridges constructed to load tolerances that the traffic of their era would not test for generations. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad's tunneling projects through the Alleghenies in the mid-19th century were engineered for a double-track capacity that the actual freight volumes of the 1850s did not require. The second track sat unused for years in certain stretches. Not because the railroad lacked the means to operate it, but because the demand to fill it had not arrived. Contemporary railroad inspectors noted this in their assessments. They described it not as waste but as preparation. For what exactly they did not specify. Preparation implies anticipation. Anticipation requires a source. Move now to the American Midwest, and the pattern intensifies rather than softens. The grain elevator systems constructed across Illinois, Iowa, and Kansas between 1870 and 1900 were built to storage capacities that, in many cases, outpaced regional agricultural output for the decade following their construction. These were not small sheds. Some were multi-story timber and later concrete structures, engineered precisely, anchored deeply, ventilated systematically, built at considerable cost by operators who, by standard economic logic, should have had every incentive to build only as much as they could immediately fill. In some documented cases, elevators sat at less than 30% capacity for their first 3 to 5 years of operation. The operators recorded this. They did not appear distressed by it. Their correspondence, where it survives, treats the excess capacity as expected, as the natural condition of infrastructure that has arrived ahead of its moment. That phrase appears in the actual records. Ahead of its moment. It is a curious way to describe a business investment. It implies that the moment is known to be coming, that the timing is understood, that the gap between construction and full use is not a miscalculation but a sequence. Shift to the United Kingdom, and the same logic appears in a different industrial register. The sewage and water infrastructure built beneath London between 1858 and 1875, under the direction of civil engineer Joseph Bazalgette, has been studied extensively and praised universally. Bazalgette's sewer network is routinely described as visionary, as infrastructure that saved London from cholera and enabled the city's continued growth through the 20th century. What is discussed less frequently is the specific margin by which Bazalgette oversized his pipe calculations. His own engineering notes, which survive, describe a deliberate decision to double the pipe diameter from what his demand calculations indicated was necessary. When asked about this decision, he reportedly stated that once the system was built, it could not easily be revisited, and so it was better to build for more than could be foreseen. That is a rational explanation. But Bazalgette did not merely add a margin. He doubled the specification. In engineering terms, that is not a safety factor. That is a categorical shift in scale. The resulting system handled London's sewage needs not for the decades he was planning for, but for over a century beyond his death, accommodating a city population that, in 1875, existed nowhere in contemporary projection models. He built for a London that did not yet exist. Across the Atlantic, the story repeats in different materials. The aqueduct system serving New York City, the Croton system, later the Catskill system, were constructed at scales that invited the same question. The old Croton aqueduct, completed in 1842, had a design capacity of approximately 90 million gallons per day. New York City's water consumption at the time of its opening was estimated at 12 million gallons per day, 7.5 times the immediate need. Every individual decision here can be defended. Engineers account for growth. Cities plan ahead. Industrial capital sometimes bets on expansion before the expansion materializes. These are real and reasonable explanations, and none of them should be dismissed. But the consistency of the overage, across water systems, sewage systems, rail systems, storage systems, terminal buildings, and the consistency of the timing, all clustering within a remarkably compressed historical window between roughly 1840 and 1920, begins to generate a question that individual explanations do not fully absorb. Why this period? Why not the century before, when cities were also growing, trade was also expanding, and ambition was also present? Why does this specific pattern of infrastructure before demand appear so predominantly, so repeatedly, and so precisely within this particular 70 to 80-year window? The standard answer is industrialization. The steam engine changed the economics of construction. Iron and steel became available at scale. Capital could be aggregated through new financial instruments. All of this is true, and all of it explains how these things were built. It does not fully explain why they were built to the specific proportions they were built to. In the United Kingdom, the municipal water infrastructure of cities like Manchester, Birmingham, and Glasgow followed a pattern structurally similar to London's. Capacities designed for populations the cities would not reach for decades, with engineering margins that went well beyond standard practice for the period. Glasgow's Loch Katrine water scheme, completed in 1859, was designed for a city population of approximately 1 million. Glasgow's population at completion was around 400,000. Infrastructure for a city 2.5 times its actual size. Researchers examining these cases from a purely engineering history perspective have noted the anomaly without reaching consensus on its cause. Some point to the influence of specific engineers who simply thought in larger increments. Some suggest that the financing structures of the period, long-term municipal bonds, railway investment trusts, encouraged capital deployment that exceeded near-term need as a structural feature of the funding model. These are serious arguments. They deserve serious attention. And yet, when the map is drawn, when the cases are placed side by side across the United States and United Kingdom, and the pattern of oversized, early arriving, precisely engineered infrastructure is laid out not as individual anecdotes but as a recurring feature of this era, something about the single-case explanations begins to feel insufficient. Not wrong. Insufficient. Because a pattern this consistent, this geographically distributed, this precisely timed, tends to invite a different class of question. Not how was each one built, but what produced the conditions in which all of them were built this way. Some researchers, examining exactly this cluster of anomalies, have begun to group these observations under a broader interpretive label. That label carries its own complications. The label, when it appears, tends to arrive with noise attached to it. You encounter it first in online spaces, forums, alternative history communities, comment sections beneath architecture videos. It surfaces unevenly, sometimes attached to claims that are difficult to verify, sometimes to arguments that are speculative in ways that responsible examination cannot endorse. And because of the environment in which it circulates most visibly, it is easy to dismiss the label before examining what it was originally meant to describe. The word is Tartaria. It is important to be precise about what that word means in different contexts, because it means different things depending on who is using it and in what register. In academic cartographic history, Tartaria, or Tartary, is not a controversial term. It appears in European maps from the 13th century onward, used to describe the vast territories of Central and Northern Asia that fell outside the direct administrative knowledge of Western European cartographers. The term was a geographic placeholder, broad and imprecise, covering regions that stretched from the Caspian Sea to the Pacific. It appears in the maps of Abraham Ortelius, in the atlases of the 17th century, in diplomatic correspondence from trading companies operating in Asian markets. Historians of cartography discuss it without hesitation because in that context, it is simply a historical geographic label with a documented provenance. That is one meaning of the word. In a second context, the one that generates significantly more friction, Tartaria is used by some researchers and commentators as an interpretive framework for the pattern of anomalies this documentary has been examining, not as a civilization to be proven, not as a hidden empire whose erasure from history is being alleged, but as a shorthand for a cluster of observations that, taken together, suggest that the conventional periodization of infrastructure development may be more complicated than standard accounts acknowledge. In this usage, Tartaria functions less as a historical claim and more as a question mark placed over a specific set of architectural and engineering facts. Some who use the label in this way point to the stylistic consistency of certain public buildings constructed across widely separated regions during the 19th century, the repeated appearance of particular ornamental vocabularies, specific dome geometries, colonnade proportions, and facade treatments in cities that had, by any conventional account, developed their architectural cultures independently. They note that buildings in St. Louis share formal characteristics with buildings in Glasgow, which share formal characteristics with buildings in Budapest, which share formal characteristics with buildings in Melbourne, all constructed within a compressed time window, all exhibiting a level of technical refinement that, in the conventional account, represents the apex of each city's newly developed industrial capacity. One interpretation is that this reflects the international circulation of architectural pattern books, the movement of trained engineers across national boundaries, and the shared influence of classical European design traditions on industrializing cities worldwide. That is the mainstream architectural history position, and it is supported by substantial documentary evidence. Another interpretation, the one that the Tartaria framework in its more careful formulations tends to gesture toward, is that the consistency runs deeper than shared aesthetic influence. That what appears as stylistic similarity may in some cases reflect something more structural, a shared technical inheritance whose origin point is less clearly documented than the buildings it allegedly produced. This interpretation does not require the existence of a hidden empire. It does not require deliberate concealment. It requires only the possibility that the history of technical transmission across this period is less completely understood than the historical consensus implies. That is a modest claim. It is also, in the context of how confidently the conventional account is usually presented, a genuinely disruptive one. Consider the question of technical knowledge transfer. The engineering feats of the mid-19th century required not just materials and capital, they required knowledge. Specific, sophisticated, applied knowledge about load distribution, hydraulic management, acoustic design, underground waterproofing, large-span structural systems. The standard account places the origin of this knowledge in a relatively small number of European engineering schools and apprenticeship traditions that developed across the 18th and early 19th centuries. Some researchers have questioned whether this origin story fully accounts for the speed at which sophisticated engineering practice spread globally during the period in question. Not because they can identify an alternative source with certainty, but because the rate of technical diffusion, from European centers to colonial outposts, to American cities, to Antipodean settlements, appears in certain case studies to outpace the documented mechanisms of knowledge transfer. Buildings of considerable technical complexity were appearing in cities that, by conventional chronology, had only recently acquired the basic institutional infrastructure to produce the engineers who built them. The gap between institutional development and technical output, in some cases, is narrow enough to invite examination. Examination is not accusation. And this distinction matters because the Tartaria conversation in its least careful form collapses examination into accusation. It moves from observing a gap to asserting a cause, from noting an anomaly to declaring a conspiracy. That collapse is not supported by the evidence, and it tends to foreclose the more productive version of the inquiry, which is simply, what do we actually know about how technical knowledge moved through this period, and are there aspects of that movement that remain incompletely documented? Architectural historians working within the mainstream tradition have, in fact, raised versions of this question, not under the Tartaria label but in the language of their own discipline. Studies of so-called anonymous architecture, of buildings whose designers are undocumented or contested, of structures that appear in historical records without clear chains of attribution. These represent a recognized area of scholarly uncertainty within the field. The Tartaria framework, at its most intellectually serious, might be understood as a popular amplification of that uncertainty. An attempt, imperfect and sometimes undisciplined, to draw public attention to gaps in the official account that professional historians have noted in quieter registers. Whether that amplification is useful, or whether it generates more confusion than clarity, is itself an open question. What is not open is the existence of the underlying observations. The buildings are real. The scale anomalies are documented. The timing compression is measurable. The geographic consistency is visible to anyone who looks at the architectural record across this period with adequate breadth. What those facts mean, whether they fit comfortably into the conventional account with minor adjustment, or whether they suggest that the conventional account has structural gaps that future scholarship has not yet closed, is a question that the evidence as it currently stands does not resolve. And perhaps that is the most honest place to leave it. Not with a conclusion, not with a revelation, but with the observation that the buildings exist, that their proportions exceed their immediate context in ways that are precisely measurable, and that the explanations available for why they were built the way they were built remain, in certain specific and documentable respects, incomplete. The structures stand.